Down. I'm Jason Gilbo, taking a look at tonight's 9-game slate here. Pitchers for DraftKings and FanDuel. Definitely some strong options and definitely some reasonably priced guys you can take a look at. I mean, obviously there's a Joe Musgrove, Kevin Gausman. I mean, you do have some guys that are certainly intriguing at mid-value prices, and then you got your top targets like Jose Fernandez, Jacob deGrom, Madison Bumgarner. So definitely a fun slate. Definitely one that's kind of odd for a Thursday. But jumping right into things here, Ross Stripling versus Gerard Eichhoff. Obviously, the Dodgers, big favorites, are minus 152. On the road, obviously, Citizens Bank is a bump to the hitters there. It's a downgrade for pitchers. Ross Stripling is a guy I'm not really intrigued with, even at a cheap price tag against the Phillies offense that isn't very good. He is pretty decent against lefties, or has shown that this year. Struggles a little bit more with right-handed bats, but I don't think he's going to be able to pay off that price tag. And given the fact that he is kind of a more expensive pitcher than some of the other guys there, especially on more so talking FanDuel, more expensive than Joe Musgrove, it's kind of a situation that I'm fading. As far as Gerard Eichhoff goes, I mean, an underdog here against a heavy lefty lineup, and given the fact that Eichhoff does struggle with lefties, I'm a bit concerned with his outing. And even at a price tag there where he sits in the mid-range, it's not something I really feel I need to dive into. You got the Dodgers projected for over 4.5 runs, near 5 in that ballpark. It's just kind of something to stay away from. Astros and Orioles next here. Kevin Gausman versus Joe Musgrove. Joe Musgrove is obviously going to be one of the more popular cheap plays tonight. He's shown very solid upside through 3 starts this year. 21 strikeouts over those 3 games. He's faced Texas and then Toronto twice. So definitely no slouch teams, but obviously he's going to face a Baltimore team that, yes, they do have a lot of upside, but overall, their second half numbers have been really unappealing. I mean, 28th in WOBA. They also have a 22% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching this season. Musgrove is able to miss some bats, 11.2%. And given the fact he's only allowed 3 walks so far this season in those 3 starts is definitely impressive. So I'm a big fan of his tonight. I mean, 7K. I'm looking at this Orioles lineup, and you know, they're projected for 4.5 runs, which I'm not really quite buying. Obviously, it still is kind of a little bit of a risky situation, but given the fact that Musgrove is the more talented of a lot of those mid-priced arms, I'm certainly okay with it. Gausman on the other side, small home favorite. Gausman's a guy who I'm certainly okay with in a GPP fashion. Given the fact that he is a little bit more expensive is something I'm not a big fan of, but he is a guy who has pitched better at home, oddly enough, given the fact that Camden Yards is more of a hitter's park. Kind of catches you off guard, but he has limited home runs compared to the 15 he's given up on the road. But overall, this is kind of a matchup where I there is some upside just because you look at the Houston bats and they do strike out quite a bit against right-handed pitching, 24%. But Gausman is a reverse splits guy, and obviously he's going to have to deal with Springer, Correa, Gaddis, Altuve, and kind of have to limit some damage. So definitely a GPP arm, but I think for the price tag, it's not something I'm going to have a ton of exposure to. White Sox and Indians, Danny Salazar versus Carlos Rodon. Danny Salazar has a little red flag next to his name just because he's still expensive, as he should be, because obviously before his DL stint, he was pitching well and then kind of started to fade off over the last few starts. He's probably going to be on a pitch count. That is something to keep an eye out for, which kind of takes him off the board for me, which is a bummer because it is a good matchup against Chicago. So it's definitely something I'm probably just going to stay away from for this start at least and see how things go and just play it safe. Carlos Rodon on the other side, an interesting GPP option, more so on DraftKings given his price. He is cheap, 6,300. Has had a good outing against the Indians this year. Went into the 7th. Didn't get the win, but did strike out 8 over that and gave up just 2 earned. So there is that potential there just because there are a lot of lefty bats in that lineup. I mean, some of them do turn over to the left side or to the right side of the plate. But 21% strikeout rate. Indians are just outside the top 10 in WOBA, so there is some definite risk. As well as Rodon picking up a win, that's something that's obviously not likely here, just given the fact that I don't expect a ton of run support from this White Sox offense. But more of a GPP situation, if anything, and more so on DraftKings. So the win's not quite as needed. As you can saw in his last start, he got 20 DK points and didn't pick up the win. So still a solid production for his price. You look at the Marlins next here, -165 favorites against the Reds in Cincinnati. Obviously, Fernandez is one of your top targets tonight. You can make the case for Bumgarner or him as being number one. You look at this Reds offense, 22nd in WOBA, 21.4% strikeout rate. Fernandez, leads the slate with near a 36 strikeout rate. Allowing a 294 WOBA to lefties. So obviously, if Billy Hamilton comes into the lineup, obviously Joey Votto, a couple other guys in the back half of that lineup, it's a number that he's been fine against lefties this year. A little bit up a bit on the road, a little bit more viable to kind of get hit around on the road. But still, Fernandez is definitely one of the top options on the board. Straley, not really worth a look here at that price. There's plenty of other options I'd rather go with. Nationals and Braves next here, Reynaldo Lopez versus Rob Whalen. You can scratch Rob Whalen from your ideas of pitching tonight. Obviously, Reynaldo Lopez is a guy, young arm, facing a Braves offense that is relatively weak. And he is coming off a start here where he did pitch really well against Atlanta. Didn't have a ton of strikeouts, just 2 there. The only game where he has really shown strikeout upside is against the Dodgers, but also did give up 6 earned. He's definitely one of those cheap guys. Once again, more of a DK play, just given the SP2 and given the fact that you might want to pay down as an SP2, and especially in tournaments because it is tough paying, obviously, Bumgarner and Fernandez in the lineup and trying to fit hitters in. So Lopez is certainly an intriguing option. Obviously, the lefty's a little bit of a concern, but I do think he could have a quality outing there and at a reasonable price tag. Twins and Royals next year. I don't want any part of this game as far as pitching goes. Tyler Duffy, I know he's had a couple of good starts in a row. Dylan G's obviously an automatic fade tonight for me. This Twins offense is rolling. You look at Duffy, back-to-back games there, posting over 20 DK points, 14 strikeouts. Something that I'm just going to probably be looking to avoid still, and I actually like KC for some value. Angels and Mariners, Matt Schumacher versus Hisashi Iwakuma. Matt Schumacher, obviously he is a guy who has pitched better at home. You look at him, compared to on the road, over 5 ERA, at home, just over a 3 ERA. Hasn't looked good against Seattle this year in 2 starts. He's been a guy who has been trending downwards, even though he has been on the road. It's still something I don't see a ton of upside in. Obviously, I won't rule him out completely for a GPP play, but still kind of a high risk, high reward. Mostly I'd rather not touch. In Iwakuma, at his price, I don't see a ton of upside with him. As we saw in his last start against Oakland, he gave up a lot of hits there, and this Angels offense doesn't strike out a ton, so I could definitely see something kind of similar where, yeah, Oakland, you look at Iwakuma where maybe he pitches 6 innings, gives up 3 earned, but if he only has 3 or 4 strikeouts and gives up 7+ hits again, you're not going to be looking at anything decent as far as a price or a production out of fantasy. So it's one thing where I'm just looking to fade Iwakuma. I think the price is just way too high. I don't see a ton of upside with him. Diamondbacks and Padres here, Archie Bradley versus Paul Clemens. Both these teams have total sitting around just over 4. And Archie Bradley, obviously, he has thrown a solid start against the Padres this season. Moving over to Petco is something that helps him out quite a bit. Cuts his ERA nearly in half. ERA of 6 at home, ERA of 3.73 on the road. Has pitched twice against San Diego this year, 16 strikeouts over 13 innings, has allowed 8 earned, though, and still 3 homers. There is certainly still a concern, but at 6,500, I can see him being a reasonable option still. Though my one concern here is that Bradley is allowing over 400 WOBA to lefties this season. Given the fact that San Diego does have Jankowski, Solarte, Dickerson, Schimpf, all in the top 5 there, it is going to be a lot of lefties for him to get through. Could he do it? Yeah, certainly, because those are not household cash game names where they chip away at you. They are kind of boomer bust targets, and that's exactly kind of how I view Bradley tonight. Paul Clemens on the other side, not a guy I'm looking to use, struggles against both sides of the plate, even though he's at home. I like this Diamondbacks offense a little bit more. Mets and Giants here, Madison Bumgarner versus Jacob deGrom. Giants still are -154 favorites, even though deGrom is on the other side. Mets projected for under 3 runs. Really hard not to like Bumgarner as the top option tonight as a home favorite. You look where he's been at home this season, 1.47 ERA, allowing a 220 WOBA there, 28% strikeout rate this season. Bumgarner is certainly capable of dominating this offense. And you just look at this lineup. Outside of Wilmer Flores, who has hit lefties well, Neil Walker is a guy who, I mean, may or may not be in the lineup. He's the only other one who has a notable WOBA against left-handers this year. Other than that, this is an extremely weak offense. I mean, 22nd in WOBA, 22% strikeout rate against southpaws. So Bumgarner, clear-cut number one option here tonight to pair up kind of with maybe a cheaper guy in GPPs. Also, you have Fernandez there. So very little splitting the two. As far as DeGrom goes on the other side, I mean, obviously he is one of the top pitchers, but for me, I mean, gets a little bit lost. I mean, he's kind of the ultimate kind of swerve play, but you look at this Giants team, they don't strike out a ton. They don't have strong ISO numbers, but just kind of a 17.5% strikeout rate. It's pretty average. When you compare him to the other guys tonight, I mean, given the fact that $800 more you can get Fernandez on DraftKings, that's something to consider. $1,000 more you can get Fernandez on FanDuel. It's kind of just makes sense to go up to them. So I like those options. I like Musgrove down cheap. There are quite a few cheap options you can pair up there with on DK. FanDuel, here's my concern with paying down at pitching outside of maybe a Musgrove, is the fact that if you do pay down and you get a Gossman or you get a Rodon, they don't quite pay off the price tag because the floor and ceiling of Bumgarner and Fernandez are so high tonight. You might get lost. It's kind of like running a race where you might just get too far behind that your batters can't catch up. So definitely keep that in mind. That's going to wrap things up with the pitcher nail down. Be sure to check out the rest of our content at dailyfantasycafe.com.